Sego Sewa Guego, Watquanawaradon G, the Hidden Coffee House podcast. Satagayon Niyong Yatsul Gadi Jorhansa, Andrew Newaxanodo, Brand de Waxanazare. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hidden Coffee House podcast. I'm Satagayondom, where my English name is Andrew Brandt. I'm a Ganyo Geha Dana Ungwahuaneha Studies teacher, or in English, Mohawk Language and Indigenous Studies. I'm an advocate for Indigenous rights, and sometimes you can find me on the stage as well. This November, come to beautiful Prince Edward County for the second run of Shatterbox Theater's production of Cabaret the Musical. I'll be reprising my role as Ernst Ludwig once again as the Cape transforms into the seedy, tawdry Kit Kat Club. Because here, life is beautiful. Get your tickets at kitkatclub.ca, that's kitkatclub.ca, and follow Kit Kat Club PEC and Shatterbox Theater on social media. They're already going fast, and the show isn't till November, so book your table. You'll love it. Today, we welcome special guest MPP Ted Hsu to discuss the Unleashing Ontario's Economy Act, its impacts, and what you can do to speak up against it. Ted Hsu lives in his hometown of Kingston, Ontario, with his extended family. He worked in science research, finance, and sustainable energy before entering politics. In 2011, Ted was elected Member of Parliament for Kingston and the Islands. From 2012 until 2015, Ted served as the chair of the Federal Ontario Liberal Caucus and was voted one of Maclean's Parliamentarians of the Year in 2013 as the MP who best represents constituents. He chose not to run again in the 2015 federal election for family reasons. In 2020, Ted chose once again to serve the residents of Kingston and the Islands as their elected representative, this time as MPP to continue his hard work for the community. Ted was elected as MPP for Kingston and the Islands for the first time in the 2022 Ontario election. In 2023, Ted announced that he would be seeking the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party. During this time, Ted crisscrossed the province hearing from Ontarians of all stripes about the issues most important to them. In 2025, Ted was handily re-elected with 61.6% of the vote in his riding of Kingston and the Islands in the snap February election, winning by a margin of more than 21,000 votes, the largest anywhere in Ontario. He currently serves the Ontario Liberal Caucus as critic for agricultural and rural affairs, natural resources, energy, and mining and forestry. Thanks for dropping into the Hidden Coffee House, MPP Hsu. It's an honor to have you on.
Oh, it's a good morning. It's an honor to be your guest here on the podcast.
Yeah, so thank you for dropping into the Hidden Coffee House podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about Ontario's Bill 5, so-called Unleashing Ontario's Economy. So, now that the bill has received royal assent, can you explain for listeners what has actually changed in Ontario law and governance?
Sure. I think the short sort of 15-second summary is that the provincial government, the cabinet, has grabbed a lot of power for themselves to make decisions that affect development projects. And that means there's going to be lobbying is going to be very important, a lot more important than it already is. Favoritism, fundraising, money is going to have a lot more influence because the ministers in Premier Ford's government are going to have a lot of power to decide things and not have to get approval from the legislature and not have to, the way it's set up now, they may not have to consult as much as they needed to in the past. And so that's the sort of the overall picture. But there's some particular things that I wanted to point out. And just to give you an example, there are things in the bill that we didn't object to so much. There are limits on activity by foreign actors. So when it comes to our electricity grid, when our natural gas system or energy system in mining, there are rules in there where the government can restrict activity by foreign players. So I think people are thinking about China or other foreign suppliers.
Yeah.
Now so that's a lot of extra power given to the minister. Even that opens things up because you can imagine a domestic company saying, "Oh, I don't like that competitor. Maybe I'll attend a fundraiser for the PCs and then try to get a meeting to see if I can restrict the activity of that foreign competitor." But that's a small thing. The bigger things, I'll just list kind of in order of how big they are. There's an exemption for an environmental assessment for a landfill in Dresden, Ontario. That's in southwestern Ontario. It's right by the Sydenham River. And in fact, I'm going to go visit the Walpole Island First Nation, which is at the mouth of the Sydenham. But that Dresden and Walpole Island, they're all around this old dump that is now going to be expanded by 30 times. They were promised an environmental assessment, and that promise was broken, and there's no more environmental assessment needed for that landfill. There's also an Eagle's Nest mine up north in the Ring of Fire area
Yeah.
that's going to have its environmental assessment canceled. Moving up on things that are important, the species at risk. The Endangered Species Act is going to be replaced by something called the Species Conservation Act, which is a lot weaker. We can get into that later.
Yeah.
This project can be exempted from what's called the Environmental Bill of Rights, which requires that you consult people about environmental effects. That's being applied to Ontario Place, the new Ontario Place development, which is sort of pet project of the
Yeah.
current government.
That's his
Uh,
baby, isn't
yeah,
it?
there's heritage. There are exemptions to the Heritage Act. So the minister could say, oh, this project doesn't need to go through the Heritage Act. And the importance of that is there can be archaeological things, especially like for European kind of archaeological things. We kind of know where things are because there's written
Yeah.
records. But for Indigenous archaeology, like it's all around, but who knows where it is because there weren't any written records, and we're just discovering things, and that's why you need to check.
Yeah. That's
But
one of
this
the
act
things too.
allows the minister to get around that and say, ah, this is a really important project. We don't need to check.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous thing. Um, then going on up, I think the worst thing in Bill 5 is there's something now that is called special economic zones. Now that
Yeah.
Bill 5 has passed, and the government can designate a certain geographic area as a special economic zone, and in principle, the way the bill is written, it doesn't have any guardrails, but the way the bill is written, any provincial, they can, inside the special economic zone, they can take a company, which they call a trusted proponent or a project, and they can exempt it from any law or any
So
regulation,
can you tell us a
and
little bit
also
more?
bylaws.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how those special economic zones work?
Yeah, so it's the idea behind them is the government wants to speed up projects, and the example they always give is a mine that takes 15 years to approve. And there's so let's be fair. There's you can certainly ask the question, why does it take 15 years to sort of figure out things like that? Can we do it faster? And I think there are ways to do it faster and not waste time. But what they're going to do now is the strategy they're using to try to speed up projects. Another example could be this Highway 413 that is
Mhm.
going through the Greenbelt. But what they're proposing to do now is to just say, oh, let's forget about that law, which says we have to check for something. So Clean Water Act or Safe Drinking Water Act or um, anything, something to do with heritage or species at risk. They're proposing to completely, they have the power at least to completely exempt a company or a project inside a special economic zone from any provincial law, any provincial regulation, or even municipal bylaws.
Yeah, that's
And
pretty,
that's what's scary about it.
yeah,
It could be abused.
that's pretty dangerous because having to or being having the power to overlook those kind of things and knowing, like just touching back on, not being able to find indigenous archaeology as prevalent as European. That's because we would move around, taking care of the land, and then we also know that there's burial sites in different places. I'm just reading The Knowing by Tanya Talaga right now, talking about her grandmother being buried right by the QEW. So there's all kinds of these different zones and all these different spaces that aren't just about the land and about the environment. It's also about where people are buried and where people's history lives. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's those things. Those spaces are special, and we can't ignore them.
yeah. So
Um,
with the Endangered Species Act replaced by the Species Conservation Act, what does that mean for species at risk and habitat protection going forward?
I think the big picture going forward is that if you want to protect species, endangered species, it's going to be a species by species fight now. So there, there are changes in this so-called Species Conservation Act, the Weaker Act, where habitat protections are weakened. So, for example, the only thing that's protected for a plant might be the area immediately around its roots, and not the overall environment that it lives in, the overall habitat. For a bird, it might just be where it nests and not where it finds food. So there's some dangerous things because, and these are dangerous because plants and animals have to live in an ecosystem that supports them. It's not just where they're rooted or where they're nesting. That those aren't the only places that support these plants and animals. Now, there was pressure put on the government because of this sort of absurd way of defining habitat. And they did make an amendment to give the minister the ability to expand the definition of habitat to so that it's a wider area, so that it's the ecosystem the plant or animal lives in. But the problem is it's still the minister's discretion. Like it's not some scientific panel that says, hey, this endangered species, it's at risk of extinction. You have to preserve this whole area so that that species can continue indefinitely. It's now the minister has to say that we're going to do that. It doesn't happen automatically. So again, there's discretion from the minister. So we've replaced a kind of fact-based process with the minister's discretion, and that opens things up for potential corruption and influence. You want to be on the good side of the minister, just like all the people around the world want to be on the good side of Donald Trump.
Yeah,
You're going to have to be on the good side of the government in power if you want to do development. And that's not the way. That's
yeah.
not the way good government should work.
No, it should be based on governance more than anything and about the people and their voices.
Yeah. The other
And
thing I would say is there's going to, when you talk about like a list of which species are endangered, the cabinet is going to have some say over that. They're going to be able to say, yeah, let's put this species on, and we're not going to put that species on. So because of that discretion of being able to put certain species on the list or not, it's going to be a species by species fight now.
yeah, it's dangerous because it sounds like a lot of science denialism that's been coming up in the past few years. And then that's almost equivalent to the denialism of indigenous knowledges
Mhm.
because they're very balanced. When you're talking about the habitat as more than just the one space, we talk about the same thing within our stories and within our teachings. So science and indigenous knowledges go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
And some of the powers that they're having completely just overlook all of that. And it's dangerous not just to indigenous people, but to everybody as a whole in Ontario.
Mhm.
Um, Having said that, there's shifts in power, right? So, how does Bill 5 give Cabinet the ability to override laws and limit judicial review? And what does that mean for democratic
Right.
accountability in Ontario?
Well, we've already talked about the centralization of power in ministers and the fact that they have kind of discretionary power that they didn't have, and it's executive power. They don't have to go and get approval from the Ontario legislature, the people that actually got elected by voters. But the thing I think the thing that people should know is that there are also immunity clauses in the in Bill 5, which means that that ministers, civil servants, people who make those decisions or carry things out in Bill 5, you can't sue them later.
Sounds
And so
very
that means
Trump-esque.
it's easier to just kind of go ahead and not worry about if you're doing something wrong or not, because you can't be sued. Uh,
Sounds like Echoes of America.
well, there is, I mean, okay, this is not as, let's be fair, and
Yeah.
this is not as bad as Donald Trump,
No, it
but,
is absolutely not. I have to agree with you
and
100% there. It
yeah,
is not as bad as him.
but
Um,
just the idea of more executive power, we should be wary of that because down the line, maybe not with this government, but in the future, power can be abused, like executive power is being abused in the United States. So,
Yeah,
but
I agree
for people to
100%. It's
know,
not
I
as
think
bad.
it's immunity clauses, like ministers, people in charge get immunity in the future from being sued, and
Yeah,
that takes away the accountability.
yeah, it does. We should always have accountability. And yeah, that's just not the right way of going about. Like if you're doing something good for the people, then you shouldn't have to put that in there, right?
Yeah.
Um, but are there parts of Bill 5 that Ontarians should be watching especially closely over the next year as it gets implemented?
Well, I would say in the near future, one thing you should look out for is what happens after the landfill near Dresden, Ontario, gets going. So the company that owns that landfill, they've already started bringing in equipment and they're doing some work. They need to get something called environmental compliance approval to, I think it needs to be updated before they can do further work to expand. So they're expanding this landfill by 30 times. And the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, so this is all the cities in Ontario except for Toronto. And it's abbreviated AMO. They're actually meeting in Toronto. Sorry, they're meeting in Ottawa next week. But the AMO wrote a letter, an open letter, saying basically it says this: look, if this can happen at an old landfill near Dresden, that all of a sudden it can open up again. It could happen to any of the other of hundreds of giant landfills across Ontario. Like
Yep.
they could be expanded. Uh, a landfill near you could be expanded without
I remember I was
with
about 13 years old and they were trying to expand the Richmond landfill here just
right. Yeah,
outside of
there's a big fight over
Tyendinaga.
that. Yeah.
There was a huge fight over that. I was actually one of the people out there in the hazmat suits carrying signs.
Oh, great.
So yeah, I remember that very distinctly. And um yeah, I
So
just
that
wanted to
I
add
would,
that in there. So I'm
yeah,
familiar with this ongoing battle of people
right.
trying to expand their landfills.
Yeah. And I think, there's a place for landfills.
Yep.
But the way it was done in Dresden, where they made a promise to have an environmental assessment, then by-election came along. That's when they made the promise. And then after the last general election, they said, "Oh, well, we're not going to do that. Sorry."
Yeah,
They just broke a promise all of a sudden. And I think the message is that could happen to a dump near you because there's hundreds of dumps all across Ontario, and it's
exactly. Like, I don't think it would have been as big of a deal for the Napanee dump if they weren't already leaching leachate into the ground.
right.
So
Yeah,
it would have been a much different situation, I
right.
believe. So,
Yeah. And the second thing I would say with the special economic zones and the ability to exempt projects from heritage laws, it's to look at the lawsuits and the consultations going on between the Ontario government and First Nations. Um,
yes.
I have to say that when I was in the legislature this spring, when Bill 5 went through, almost a couple of days after it came through, I was standing up and saying, this is way too much power for ministers, and it's has all these other problems. But the opposition really started going when the First Nations got wind of this and started to study the bill and got organized and came to the legislature. So I think First Nations have played a big role and will be playing a big role in how Bill 5 is implemented. So pay attention to those to that news story.
Oh, absolutely. So it passed without prior consultation from First Nations. What do you think that signals about the government's approach to Indigenous rights and
Yeah, so
obligations?
the reason, right when the bill came out, right when Bill 5 came out, a day or two later, they had what's called a technical briefing. So that's where MPPs can say, I'd like to ask some like detailed questions about the bill. Um, and you can really get into the dig into the details. And they have a whole bunch of officials from the ministries there who are ready to answer your questions. So I took advantage of my technical briefing to ask a question which got asked in a mining bill last year. There was a mining Build Mines Faster bill, Bill 71 from the last Parliament. So I said, well, for Bill 5, did you do any Indigenous consultations, First Nations consultations before you tabled the bill? And the answer again was no. Um, so not I would say not only did the bill pass without prior consultations, the bill was written and tabled in the legislature without consultation with First Nations. And I think the way the government looks at it is they figure they can kind of do things, figure out what they want to do, and then consult. And it's probably the wrong order because people are not going to feel that they had a say or that there's a reason why there's three, free, prior, informed consent.
Exactly.
And the prior is one of the three, and it's there because after the fact, you can make arguments like, oh, we already committed to this. It's going to cost too much to undo. We already arranged all of this. Don't mess it up. You don't want to have people make those sorts of arguments, and that's why the prior consent is so important.
Exactly, because in there it also says that the one presenting the project has to be willing to shut it down. Like when we say no, they need to be able to go back, review it, and then come back with something new. So
yeah, it's probably less costly for everybody if everybody's included.
Yeah, exactly.
In
That's
the
skipping a
beginning.
step. They want to talk about cutting red tape and this and that, but it's
Yeah,
usually
and I
just
think
for,
it's not that First Nations want to
you know,
cause to add red tape. It's not that First Nations want to delay things. It's not that First
no,
Nations are against economic development. It's
we just want to have our voices heard.
yeah, you want to be part of it. Like this is our land, and
Exactly.
and
Like we've been living here, we've been taking care of it for millennia, so
and I
let's
think there
make
are
sure we can all
examples
work
too.
together to take care of it, right?
There's some great examples of collaboration between indigenous groups and economic development. There's indigenous-led companies and
Exactly. So there is a precedent out there, and if they followed it, things could be running a lot differently, and when all voices are included.
yeah.
But what do you
It's
see
a
as
lot
the
more hard work at the beginning, but
yes.
it can speed things up and people can be happier at the later on.
So are there any legal or constitutional challenges that could be still pursued to protect treaty rights and land stewardship from the impacts of Bill 5?
Well, I think the main the the main challenge, which I think has the best chance of making a difference, is, and I think the government is already responding, is the legal challenges from First Nations based on the duty to consult. And so that's why I think it's very important to watch the news on that. The government realizes that they don't want to spend years and years in court fighting
Yeah.
these things. And so they're trying to do some consultations this summer uh, about with certain First Nations about what it means to have a special economic zones. How do you set it up? How do you make sure that you have consultations with First Nations? The tricky thing is, these powers, the power to exempt a company or a project from any law. These are really big, broad powers. And so because they're so broad, like every time you use that power, you pretty much have to consult because it's such a broad power. And I think what I've heard from reports about these consultations over the summer is that many First Nations leaders feel that it's still very vague. It's still very fuzzy how the government is going to use these broad powers that it's given itself. The other constitutional challenge might be that being able to give an exemption to any law or any regulation, it kind of contradicts, it conflicts with the whole idea of setting up a parliament that passes laws. So you could go back to maybe even the British North America Act you could go back to the very, very beginning of the application of British law in Canada and say you can't pass a law that gets rid of the application potentially gets rid of the application of every other law. It's like you're kind of upending the role of Parliament. So there's a potential for a constitutional challenge. That's more academic. I don't know where that will go, but I think the thing that will really make a difference, because the government has to react to it, is challenges from the First Nations based on duty to consult, treaty
Yeah.
rights.
So I just want to talk about the environment again for a second. How
Mhm.
could special economic zones affect large-scale projects like the Ring of Fire or the Eagle's Nest mine, both environmentally and the surrounding areas?
Well, I would say it's hard to know. Like it depends how these special economic zones are set up. If they're set up in a way that consultation with First Nations and other communities inside the special economic zone, uh, if it's set up in the way that people have a say and that puts limits like guardrails on what the government can do, uh, uh, we could contain the risk. But if it's set up in the way that a company can, doesn't want to do some expensive thing that will protect the environment, and um, they get really close to the government, and they get the government to waive some rule, some regulation, or some law, then it can be done very poorly as well. So I think it really depends a lot on how they set things up. I think if you look at how the federal government has a bill, it's also Bill 5, but we'll call it Bill C5, the
Yep.
federal bill. That has some, I mean, I think First Nations are challenging that too, but at least
Sure.
that has some guardrails. Like it says, well, here's a list of laws that we might want to provide exemptions to. Provincially, it's like any law, and the federal bill says, okay, there's a list of laws you could have exemptions to, and there's a whole process if you want to add a law
So like some
to the
transparency
list.
then.
Yeah, and there's some transparency, and the federal law has a sunset clause, like after 5 years it goes away.
Okay.
Provincial law has no sunset. It's like
Mm,
it's not tied at all. Like one of the amendments that I put forward, which we didn't get to because we stopped the bill before we got to it. But one of them was just to put a sunset when Donald Trump got out of office in
yeah.
2029. And it's just a symbolic date. But the point I wanted to make was there was no sunset clause in
Yeah.
the provincial Bill 5 for these extraordinarily broad discretionary powers. So I think that's something that can that we can look at is to ask the Ford government, why didn't you put in this guardrail that the federal bill has?
Yeah. So public voices, everybody's voices always matter. That's the whole point of our system here in Canada, that everybody has a voice, everybody has a vote. So even though Bill 5 is law, what actions could people take to still influence on how it's implied and enforced?
Well, I think, just for the average person, I mean, some people will go to demonstrations and things like that, but I think talking to other people in Ontario, because it's important for people to know about this bill. A lot of people, they're busy, they have things to worry about in their life, and they may not. Um, I think you can't blame them for not being able to pay attention to every law that comes out, or even the whole period in between elections. But I think talking to other people, especially people who might have voted for the PC candidate in their riding, to say, "Hey, did you know there's this bill? And this bill, it seems a little lawless. The province can exempt a project or a company from any bill. And just think, like, if you had a lot of money, you could get your way. Just because there's so much extra power, like there's no process that has to be followed in this bill. It's going to be a free for all in terms of uh, being in favor, having the government's favor, and making sure you do your donation, attend those fundraisers so you
Yeah.
can have some FaceTime with ministers. So just letting people know, other people know who are busy, just give them the 2 or 3 sentences, bring it up, and get people talking about Bill 5.
Are there past examples where public pressure after a bill passed still led to meaningful changes?
Yeah, there's a couple. So to Doug Ford's credit, he does back down when people rise up, and there's
Mhm.
a couple of good examples. One, there was a bill in the last Parliament, Bill 28, which was going to use the notwithstanding clause in the Constitution to prevent a CUPE education worker strike. And so there were a lot of protests about that. A lot of first the public sector unions, and then the trade unions joined in, and there was a lot of uproar. When the trade unions joined in, then Doug Ford really had to back down because he has a lot of support amongst the trade unions. And that caused him to basically repeal Bill 28. The other example is the Ford government tried to take land out of the green belt for development, and there was, this money involved there, so
Yep.
a little shady, and it's still being investigated. It's still under a criminal investigation by the RCMP,
Mhm.
and he had to back out of that one because there's a lot of public pressure, a lot of investigative reporting, and it just started to look really bad.
Yeah.
And so he backed down, even though he had a majority, he can force through whatever he wants. But that pressure
Yeah.
worked, and I think people should know
That's
that
good
pressure
that
works.
he still will back down. So people should know that Ford will back down when the pressure's applied.
Right.
He still holds a democratic government. Even though it's a majority, he still listens to the people for the most part. But
Yeah, if he's
before,
worried about losing the next election, he'll do something. I mean, you have to give him that.
yeah,
And so
absolutely.
you gotta figure out. It's one thing to get together with some friends and protest, but if Ford may not care about that. But
Yeah.
if you're talking to people who voted for him and they live in, Peel or they're 905 or rural Ontario, then he'll start to worry. The Ford government does do a lot of polling to see if people are upset about something. So talk to the people who maybe voted for Ford last time. Try to peel them away until Ford will pay attention.
Yeah, he will. So this has been an excellent conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. I just want to ask you one more thing before we go. What role can municipalities, First Nations, and advocacy groups play in holding the government accountable for how this law is used?
I think the thing to do is to insist on insist on a process. Try to get rid of the sort of the discretionary nature of this broad power. The fact that as far as the bill is written, ministers can just decree that this law doesn't apply to this company that I like. So insist on a process, and I think First Nations are doing that this summer with the consultations and saying like you can't have a fuzzy process. You can't have something that's not defined, that we don't know what it is. We don't know where consultations come in, and you have these broad powers. So everybody from municipalities and First Nations and advocacy groups we can all insist on some kind of forcing the provincial government to adopt some kind of process when it comes to special economic zones. And if we want to, I think, after we have, if you want to overturn the bill, you got to wait until the next election. But for now, make sure that there's some kind of process that's followed.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on, Ted. And is there anything else that you'd like to say to our listeners before I let you go?
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I think it's just really important for people to know about Bill 5, and that's one of the things that I'm hoping that I can do this summer, is just to get a few more people to know that this bill is out there and that there's so much potential with these big powers for lobbying and favoritism and money to play a bigger role. And these executive powers are they're really being abused south of the border, and we don't want to do that here in Ontario.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you again for coming on. I know you're very busy, so I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with me today and getting the message out to our listeners. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yawagoa once again to Kingston and the Islands MPP Ted Hsu. Remember, the collective voices of Ontarians are what will be the demise of Bill 5. Speak to your friends, your neighbors, and inform your communities. This could mean during the next legislature that this bill could be repealed if enough political pressure is put on the Ford government. Also, just a reminder that this November, Chatterbox Theatre will be transforming the Cape in Prince Edward County into the seedy Berlin Kit Kat Club for the second run of Fred Ebb and John Kander's Cabaret. I will be reprising my role as Ernst Ludwig. Head to kitkatclub.ca, that's kitkatclub.ca, and get your tickets. They're going fast. You don't want to miss this, because here, life is beautiful. Remember to follow the Hidden Coffee House Pod as well as Chatterbox Theatre and Kit Kat Club PEC on social media. And remember, as always, stay loud.
Oh, the river Rhine sings by the linden tree, its melody